So here we have Death and Taxes, or White-Black Control, White-Black Eldrazi, whatever you want to call the deck. It's basically a black-white mid-range deck with a bunch of grindy creatures, mid-range creatures, disruptive creatures, if you will. Um, and then it's got an Eldrazi package to it as well. So, just goes to show there's more than one Eldrazi deck in Modern. It's not just Bant Eldrazi. So we've got our 4 Eldrazi temples, of course, and then a bunch of colorless lands to be able to cast cards like Thought-Knot Seer, cards like Reality Smasher. Caves of Koilos is a perfect fit. Also, Fetid Heath. Ghost Quarter works quite well in the deck. We've got 4 copies of Leonin Arbiter, so Ghost Quarter is extra good. And with decks like Scapeshift and various annoying lands in the format, we really like having a main deck answer to those types of lands. Then the 4 copies of Godless Shrine. We've got 1 copy of Seagate Wreckage as another colorless land that if we've deployed our entire hand, we can start gassing back up. And then Shambling Vents is the man land of choice in the deck. So pretty solid mana base, just straight 2 colors. Although you do have this balance between colored sources and colorless sources. And then we've got some 1 mana plays here. Aether Vial. We've got 28 creatures in the main deck, so having a turn 1 Vial and then being able to get multiple creatures into play in a single turn is really effective. If you're able to do that. Now, there's other times where you have a Vial and you're not able to use it quite as effectively. So the card can go both ways, but definitely has a very high upside. It also allows you to get creatures into play that you might not otherwise be able to cast. There's 4 copies of Path to Exile. It's the only spot removal spell in the main deck, and we all know about Path to Exile, but the fact is that it can exile an opposing creature, and that's actually a benefit because we've got processors like Wasteland Strangler here. And then Relic of Progenitus is not only just a good card because of the graveyard disruption, but it also can exile a card and works nicely with processing. So these are our non-creature spells, the only non-creature spells in the main deck. So from here on, it's going to be creatures. So we've got 4 Leonin Arbiter. This card also works well with Path to Exile because you have an Arbiter in play, then you path an opposing creature when they don't have that 2 mana up, and it's just a full-on remove your creature, no basic land to be found. Then we've got Thalia, Guardian of Thraben. Just a nice hate bear style card. There's a lot of non-creature spells in the format. This deck only plays 1 mana ones, so it normally punishes your opponent more than it punishes this deck. Also, having First Strike, sometimes people forget about that line of text on the card. And then we've got Tide Hollowsculler. So there's actually a reasonable amount of hand disruption in this deck. And Tide Hollowsculler is a form of hand disruption on turn 2. So it actually does quite a bit, and it's another way of exiling an opposing card. It works great with Wasteland Strangler. And speaking of Wasteland Strangler, we've got 4 Wasteland Stranglers in our main deck. It feels great whenever you're able to turn 3, kill something, process something. That was an interaction and is an interaction in Standard. It's translating to Modern quite nicely. 1 copy of Kitchen Finks. It's a good card, but there's a lot of competition for the 3 mana creatures. So there's 1 Finks main, 1 sideboard. There's also 4 copies of Flicker Wisp, which work great at being able to blink a lot of this stuff, like Wasteland Strangler, like Finks. And Flicker Wisp just has a lot of situations where it's quite nice. It's also very good to pop it into play off of an Aether Vial. There's one of the other Thalia Heretic Cathar. So this is a card we're seeing play in Standard. It's now seeing some play in Modern here. And it's just a good card, good creature. Sometimes your opponent isn't really thinking about it when deploying their lands. All of a sudden, you play it on turn 3, then they have to put in a non-basic land into play tapped, and it kind of disrupts their whole sequence of events. Then we've got a couple of Eldrazi Displacers. Displacer is perfect in this deck because we've got temples, we can activate it multiple times in a turn, and displacing a Strangler, a Flicker-Wisp, a Finks, what have you, can provide a lot of card advantage, not to mention, obviously, being able to displace opposing creatures, or Thought-Knot Seer. So, of course, we're an Eldrazi deck, we're playing 4 copies of Thought-Knot Seer, and also 1 Reality Smasher. So those are the big cards in the main deck, the top end. And yeah, pretty straightforward main deck here. So let's take a look at the sideboard. So we got 1 Thoughtseize for disruption. There's also a Burton Forge Tender. Forge Tender is quite nice against burn, against any deck with burn spells, really. Rest in Peace is for the graveyard decks, Glorious Vengeance, Dredge, what have you. Stony Silence, we all know about Tron, but there's also some other artifact-based decks that pop up. Affinity, Lantern Control. There's 1 Go for the Throat as another spot removal spell to supplement the pass in the main deck. We don't want this card in our main deck just because Affinity is a deck in the format, but it's a solid sideboard card. There's a lot of creatures in the format, and you find yourself boarding this one in a lot. And there's 1 copy of Zealous Persecution. We want a way to be able to beat Lingering Souls if our opponent has a bunch of spirits in play, and it also just comes into play in weird spots, and it's just a complete blowout. Whenever I see people board in Zealous Persecution, I'm like, wow, that was very impressive. And it's just a one-of, so it's not really taking up too much sideboard space. We see right now decks like Scapeshift seeing more play. So Leonin Arbiter is great in the main deck against that deck, but we've also got 2 Mind Sensors in the board, so we're stopping our opponents from searching their decks. Chord of Calling, Scapeshift, Primeval Titan. No, we're going to stop that and make it a little bit more difficult to search your library for what you want to be searching for. So we've got another Finks for those aggressive matchups and grindy matchups. The Warship is also for aggressive matchups. We've got another Reality Smasher and then 1 Explosives to round out the sideboard. We see Explosives in so many sideboards in Modern right now. It's just such a versatile card. So this is the deck, and I haven't played a ton with it, but I played enough to know that it's a very solid deck, and I want to play more with it. So looking forward to the game.